We're going to talk about truth, art, and a messy world today, and discuss how art might be able to tell the truth, or in some cases, point out untruths and make a critical commentary on culture. We know that art objects and artifacts can tell us a lot about culture, regardless of how close in time that culture is to us. And while in this time you're considering these images and ideas that will follow, I want you to think about ways that art might shape culture based on what its message is. So, in order to think about truth and beauty with visual art, we're going to talk about these two pictures today. The picture on the left is by Kehinde Wiley, who's a contemporary Black American portrait painter. This picture is called The Equestrian Portrait of the Count Duke Oliveras, and it was painted in 2005. It's oil on canvas, and it's about 9 foot by 9 foot. The picture on the right is by an artist, Diego Velázquez, who is a late Renaissance, early Baroque painter from Spain. And this is sort of the art historical first or original of this subject matter, and it's what Kehinde Wiley is doing is making a direct lift or comparison from art history for his portrait on the left. So the picture on the right is Don Gaspar de Guzman, the person who was Count Duke of Oliveras, and it was made in 1635. It's also an oil painting on canvas. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Kehinde Wiley, and this is a picture of him in his Brooklyn studio. In the background, we have one of his paintings from the Economy of Grace series, and you'll get to watch a documentary later on in the semester on the Economy of Grace. Kehinde Wiley is a Los Angeles native, but he lives currently and works in New York. He's pretty successful. In the last 10 years, I would say he's risen to a level of fame that has allowed him to do sort of what all visual artists kind of dream of, and that is just make work full time and sell it. He has been included in solo and group exhibitions all over the world, galleries and museums, and he's met critical acclaim while living, which isn't sort of what we think about as being typical for the experience of most visual artists. So Kehinde Wiley has done something really pretty incredible and firmly situated himself within art history's portrait painting tradition. He does work strictly in portraiture. He's sort of a contemporary descendant, not in genealogical terms, but in sort of the descendants of art history, of a long line of portraitists that we think about as being really incredible and important, like Reynolds, Gainsborough, Titian, Ong, and others. And what his work does is really engages the signs and visual rhetoric of heroism, power, majesty, and sublime, while representing primarily urban Black and brown men found throughout the world. So this picture on the left is a portrait bust of Kanye West by Kehinde Wiley, and the picture on the right is King and High Priest, and it's an object from the series Iconic. So the portrait bust of Kanye is something that has been commissioned by Kanye of Kehinde Wiley, and it's sort of a bronze cast piece, life-size or just over life-size. Not really something we're used to seeing when we think about portrait busts, which might be something that we see of kind of like a heads of state. There's one on campus of Herbert Hoover in the Hoover Building, but you don't really think about Kanye being depicted in this media. So what Kehinde Wiley is interested in is applying this visual vocabulary and conventions of glorification, history, wealth, and prestige to the subject matter, which for him comes from the urban fabric. In the case of the picture on the right, he has these more intimately scaled portraits. Usually his pictures are quite large. This one is the king and high priest is 40 by 24 by 2 inches, and the picture on the inside is even smaller than that. They're made with the same kind of visual language and gestures of a 15th century icon, but they're depicting contemporary subjects like all of his work. And what he does is select people from the streets of New York City and other cities. These pictures are presented in these specially designed frames that are architectural and gilded in the style of their Byzantine forebears. So it's really a modern day altarpiece. But instead of, the Blessed Mother or Christ, you see an urban, contemporary, young Black American man. We're going to look at quite a few altarpieces later on in the semester, and I want you to think about this one when you're considering those Renaissance pieces. So initially, Kehinde Wiley is working on portraits that were based from photographs taken of young men found on the streets of Harlem. But as his practice grows and he becomes more successful, his eyes lead him more towards what is prevalent, internationally, and what can he see all over the place? What are the common things that he can draw from in contemporary urban cultures all over the world? So he starts to include models from other cities, places like Mumbai, Senegal, Dakar, Rio de Janeiro, and others. And these portraits accumulate into a really big body of work called the World Stage. So the models are dressed in everyday clothing, which is sort of like street clothes, hip hop clothes with sort of like, maybe some t-shirts with logos and printed icons and things that we recognize. And they're kind of this, the idea is that there's this far reach of Western ideals of style. When I was in West Africa, there were people that had like t-shirts on with like Nike logos, and they were wearing jeans and sneakers, but they, maybe lived in a place that doesn't look like what you would expect someone that is wearing those clothes comes from. So it's really kind of an interesting thing that he wants to poke at, sort of like how Western style comes into other areas of the world, not just the United States or Western Europe. So this juxtaposition of the old, the comparison of the old inherited by the new, their postures are, maybe sort of regal or copied from art history portraits, but their clothing is totally contemporary and again Western. So this is an image of the street outside the Seattle Art Museum. There's advertisement here for the New Republic exhibition, and this is from last year outside of the Seattle Art Museum. So what Wiley's doing is not shying away from really complicated socio-political histories that are relevant to the contemporary world. And his figurative paintings and his sculptures, what they do is quote historical sources. And instead of those historical icons and images of people like heads of state, kings and queens, princes, commanders, war heroes, he's putting contemporary, average young Black men in the limelight, in the field of power. And they're heroic. They're about this modern style that's unique and contemporary. And when you look at them, they're just wrought with these complex issues that a lot of people want to ignore. And it's powerful work. So it's important for you to think about Kehinde Wiley, the size of his work. This is a picture of him in his studio working on a portrait from the Rumors of War series. And the Count Oliveras picture that he painted is like this one in size. And you can see he's an average sized dude, but he's up on a step stool or step ladder here trying to reach the top of this picture. This series, Rumors of War, is inspired by the history of equestrian portraiture, which is a thing. These pictures that Wiley has made are expansive. They're 9 foot by 9 foot in most cases, and they're really exaggerated in terms of style and scale, and they have this really high key cinematic color highlights, lots of brightness, lots of ornamentation, and they sort of show his interest in that power and masculinity contrasted with really lots of ornament and decoration and sort of some feminine elements. So there's this clash between the two pictures we're talking about, a clash of centuries and time, a clash of society that heightens the sense that the Wiley's figures really are sort of timeless. Like they represent contemporary culture, but also they don't. And again, remember that his subject matter, the actual portraits, the people that he's working from, come from people that he meets on the street. So this is sort of the original or the first portrait that Wiley is lifting from, and it's attributed to Diego Velázquez, a really important painter from late Renaissance, early Spanish Baroque period. In this picture, Don Gaspar de Guzman, who is the original Count Duke of Olivares, is about 50 inches by 41 inches, and it was painted in 1635. So the Count Duke of Olivares is King Philip IV's powerful prime minister between the years of 1621 and 1643. And this picture is a model or a reduced variant of a large equestrian portrait of the Count Duke, and it belongs in the collection of the Prado in Madrid in Spain. Art historians believe that this was painted in celebration of a victory over the French at the border town Fuenterrabía in 1638. And the Count is depicted here holding a baton, and he is shown as a victorious commander. His beautiful white horse holds this dressage position known as a levade. So this is an example of that late Renaissance, early Baroque European equestrian painting that Kehinde Wiley sees and becomes interested in. Diego Velázquez, and this is what we think he looked like, before the invention of photography, so we're not 100% sure. But he is perhaps the most admired and maybe the greatest European painter that ever lived. He possesses a miraculous gift for conveying a sense of truth with paint. Even though this is before photography, they feel so much like convincing likenesses of what a nose looks like, what an eye looks like, how light rakes across the face, texture of hair, texture of clothing, that they're just really kind of incredible, but not tight, really sort of just kind of luxurious and sensuous within the paint. They seem like they're real, but they're also kind of effortless looking. So this is a picture also in the collection of the Prado Museum in Madrid. We think it's a self-portrait, but it's definitely a study for the painting Surrender of Breda, which was also painted in 1635. So Velázquez is born in Sevilla, in Spain. He is the son of a Portuguese lawyer and showing promise as a young man for art, for visual art, for painting. He begins an apprenticeship in 1611 with a well-known painter of the time, Francisco Pacheco. The Pacheco studio or atelier resembles an academy in which students learn the techniques of painting in an idealizing style that is grounded in sort of Catholic devotional artworks. In early works of Velázquez, however, such as this picture, The Supper at Emmaus, he abandons that Pacheco's style, old-fashioned style, and starts painting directly from life. There's an important contemporary of Velázquez's would have been the Italian painter Michelangelo de Medici, otherwise known as Caravaggio. And this is sort of the beginning of the Baroque, where light becomes a really important factor or sort of element the light and dark, the drama of the Baroque painting here. So this is Caravaggio's influence, and we know that Velázquez traveled to Italy and would have seen some of that work and would have been influenced by it. So in the summer of 1623, Velázquez's life changes forever. He's called to Madrid to paint a portrait of the king. And that original picture is lost, but this one we still have, also in the collection of the Prado in Spain. And this is King Philip. So he 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 has success in this picture. It pleases the king, and Velázquez ends up becoming official court painter, and he remains attached to the court for the rest of his life, which means that he's sort of got it made in the shade. Um, he ascends hierarchy in court appointments and eventually receives a knighthood, which is a really big deal. When he was in Madrid, his work was influenced by some Venetian paintings that King Philip had in the royal collection. So, in his final decade of life, Velázquez's handling of paint becomes even more free and luminous. And we see that a bit in the picture here of Maria Teresa, the Infantada of Spain. This was probably a portrait made for her future husband, King Louis XIV of France. And it's actually really, it's a pretty well-known picture, but not as well-known as Las Meninas, which is the picture on the right side of the screen now. Really a beautiful portrayal of the royal family. Las Meninas, or the Ladies in Waiting, is also part of the Prado's collection. In the picture, we see Velázquez himself painting on the left-hand side of the screen before this really enormous canvas. He's painting a portrait here of the king and queen, and if you look in the middle of the picture, there's a mirror that reflects back King Philip and his queen. But the real subject of this picture, obviously, is the princess, the little Infantada who's come to watch Velázquez at work. She's standing between her two ladies in waiting, who are talking to her and encouraging her to behave, and she's just precious. And then we have also some other court members and a dog who are rendered with really incredible freedom and truth to nature. This is one of the most important pictures within art history, within the canon of Western art history, and any survey class that you take from 1450 on to contemporary times is going to reference this picture. So what does Velázquez and Wiley have to tell us about truth? As I mentioned, the rumors of war, of which the Count riding victorious is a part of that series, includes other comparisons such as this one, where we have the art historical painting of Napoleon riding over the Alps, and then Wiley's version, this one as well. But the equestrian portrait of the Count Duke Oliveras of Kehinde Wiley's is not comparing to those other ones or contrasting to those other ones. It's contrasting to the Velázquez. So again, what's happening here? What's Wiley trying to say about Velázquez, or about art in general, or about equestrian figures, or about society? And why can we gain some truth from this? Well, for me, I could sit and look at this picture of Kehinde Wiley's, and I could break it down formally. And we learned how to do that in the last video. We talked about all the elements and principles of art and design that make an art object or an image successful. And there's a lot going on here that makes this picture successful. It's a beautiful composition. There's a lot to look at. There's repetition. There's rhythm. Wiley is a master of color. He's really painting luminous colors that are believable and vibrant and show light and dark and help us understand that there's a source of light coming from the left and raking across the picture. But why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting not just because of the formal elements. It's interesting because there's content. There's something happening here. It's narrative. It's not just a genre painting of an equestrian figure, but I see this, and remember, it's 9 foot by 9 foot across. Um, it's in this huge, ostentatious, gaudy Baroque gold frame. It's got a background of this incredible um, wallpaper, Baroque wallpaper with all these details in gold and this really rich blue that's ultimately kind of feminine in contrast to the kind of powerful, strong equestrian figure. And we've got a black guy on a white horse. We've got a guy who looks like he belongs, you know, in Harlem, and he would have been, as we understand from Wiley's artist statements, someone that Wiley met on the street with his studio assistants in Harlem, and he picked him out to be on this horse. When in all of art history, or any history, do we see the hero as an urban black guy? We don't. And Kehinde Wiley is talking about the difference between this image, who, if you go into the Prado, you go into the Louvre, you go into the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, or you go into the National Gallery in Washington, and this is really what you see. In the canon of Western art history, not only is it sort of primarily men and primarily Anglo men whose work is represented, but the subject matter is also those same sort of demographics. It's not necessarily going to be this type of person, someone who's sort of an ethnic minority and not usually celebrated, not usually the hero, not usually the majestic. And he's painting this person not in historical garb. He could have chosen to put his model in the same kind of clothing that the Count, Duke of Oliveras, is depicted in the Velázquez painting, but that's not what he does. He puts him in a red hoodie, and he puts him in these great comfortable pants, and he puts him in the Nike sneakers, and he's got a cell phone in his belt instead of, or next to the sword. So the Count is being depicted here as a really powerful person, maybe the most powerful man in the kingdom of Spain, um, because he has this, he's a war hero, and he's gaining riches for Spain as he's making these conquests. And then again, we're putting these two back together. What's happening here? If we compare the foot of Kehinde Wiley's hero with Velázquez's hero, the original Count Oliveras, sneaker versus boot. If we compare what they're wearing, the red sweatshirt versus the armor with the gold detailing and the really ostentatious, crazy hat. And then we see, again, a direct comparison or contrast between the sword, and then I can see what looks like maybe like a blackberry or something. This is 2005 that Wiley paints his equestrian figures, so maybe before smartphones, I don't know. And then on the right, you have the Duke, and he's got, maybe papers folded up, or some sort of important communication in his little sash or bag there. I think as far as truth goes, we can learn a lot by looking at the work of Kehinde Wiley. For Diego Velázquez, he was interested in truth of representation. There, he's marking this history of the victorious battle of the Count and the majesty and the power of the Kingdom of Spain in 1635. And Kehinde Wiley is pointing out, the incredible power of the contemporary urban black or brown man, and saying look at what's pervasive about our culture today, and what do we see everywhere, and what is power and what is not powerful, and what is heroic and what is not. And he's definitely pointing us to comparisons of, what has been preserved in our history, and what do icons of culture in visual arts show us and tell us about history? And who do we see represented and who do we not see? And he's telling us to pay attention to who we don't see and what that reveals about truth. Thanks for listening.